beginning of a project, we'll sit and we'll talk about the movie and what it needs. And of course, in this case, we needed everything from the first movie. And we needed to do a whole nother chapter on top of that. Just new stuff, because you want to be able to find those interesting, quirky, never heard before type of sounds. In modern film scoring, it's a great device and can really help define a character in a moment. All of a sudden, this sort of ear candy appears and people go, ooh, and they're not even intellectually aware of it, but they just know that it makes them smile and makes them more interested. I was growing up in the late 60s and early 70s and living in San Francisco when Don Buchla was inventing one of the first voltage-controlled synthesizers. And I actually met him in the early 70s and watched with fascination at this whole new genre sort of evolving. I was just fascinated, really fascinated. Create brand new sounds, create a whole new musical vocabulary that no one had ever heard before. And then I could write for that and create, hopefully, an emotional impact that's never been quite received in that way before. This was an idea that, to this day, I just find captivating. I started off as a trumpet player, interest in jazz and classical music. But along the way, I got very interested in electronic music and writing for genres other than just modern jazz, to the point where a film director heard some of this other type of music and offered me an opportunity to score a film. I tried it, and it turned out I really liked it. And I seemed to be pretty good at it, naturally. I was the composer on the original reboot of The Mechanic with Jason Statham. Simon West was the director of the first, and he just pushed me right from day one. We need a James Bondian type hook for this guy. And so I created a guitar sound. I feel there's a great deal of Jason in The Mechanic. He's larger than life, very physical. Never met the man. I don't know if he's as cold and reserved as the mechanic is, but he certainly communicates that well. His presence gives you that. So there's a very well-drawn character there. He lives in a slightly surreal universe of the things he can do and accomplish, and we need to embrace him musically in that way. And gave him a hook, gave him those moments that when he turns around and becomes the mechanic, that this theme can kick in and make you smile, make you enjoy him as a larger-than-life character. I think one of the most interesting things about the character of Arthur Bishop is that he's a loner. He does not allow himself to connect to anybody, and that here he is, living in Rio, a beautiful, beautiful city in a beautiful boat, but he's alone. So it was important to start this film to restate that profound sense of loneliness and sort of an emptiness to his life. And what's interesting about the second film is that he allows himself to actually care for somebody. A woman enters his life, and so she required a whole new vocabulary of music. It never occurred in the first movie. So let's somehow let the music really help us understand that side of him. The music needs to have another warmer, more organic, more human side to it. I introduced the acoustic guitar, which then becomes her signature sound. I think it's a good storytelling point because it allows you then to sense why he might let this crack in the emotional door open for this woman. I think when you have an exotic locale, you do flirt with the idea of bringing exotic sounds into the score to complement that. When he first comes to Thailand and he's out in the beautiful ocean to visit his friend May, I bring in a flute, a Thai flute for that section. When he goes into the frenzy of Bangkok, I use a wooden thing that looks like a trumpet bell, but it's got a double reed. You put that in a high-tech EDM sort of orchestrated cue, and it sounds fantastic. And it gives you, again, sort of this adrenaline push of going into an exotic but chaotic and frenetic world. filmmaking today, sound design and the sound of all the fantastic effects are a major consideration. There's only so much space in the audio spectrum. And so I work very closely with a sound designer to make sure that there's room for everybody. When that boat blows up, I don't need to be there. The sound of that explosion is going to be so big, there's nothing I can do to compete. And then music can tell the story of the aftermath much better than any sound design. So we trade. We trade as to what each of us can offer that will tell the story better. Hey! I tend to not throw music at everything. I've often said there's two most powerful things that I can do for you as a composer of music, is to start the music and to stop the music. That means there's silence is a component here, that there's nothing and then I come out of that nothing. And then I'm doing something and I stop and I leave a breath. Those are two of the most powerful gestures, as simple as it sounds, that music can do for you.
The principal I represent has an offer for you. He would like 3 men killed. Each death must look like an accident. Your specialty, I believe.
I think the big challenge in an action film is to keep the action interesting. There's at least 50 minutes of just pure adrenaline, heart-pounding, running around, beating people up. So it's a real challenge to make that last fight just as interesting and more interesting than the first fight. So we said, well, let's really concentrate on the EDM, sort of, big, solid, almost dance-type rhythms. One of the reasons why electronic element in scores like this I find very useful and very attractive is because all of a sudden you can sort of change up the drum sound, will just be in another world. The whole thing can shift and just feel even more epic somehow, just by subtly changing the impact of level of drums. But you also want the movie to feel big. And so in this action score, I used a hybrid orchestration. If you have the and then you put a large orchestra across the top of that, all of a sudden it's as wide as the screen. And it's important for the score to have the same breadth and depth and size and epic qualities that the pictures do. In a movie like The Mechanic, it's that larger-than-life James Bond. Here's a guy who will never have any part of a life like that. So when Jason's on the screen, you want people grinning and cheering and having a good time. Anything that can be learned about the vocabulary of music to help you do that will be very valuable to know for scoring a film like this.